Welcome to Massey College. Bienvenue. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers and I'm the principal of Massey College. We are celebrating the International Day for Persons with Disability. And we had the privilege here at Massey having a great advocate for disability rights in the person of Christine Karza. So tonight we're having a special dialogue remembering Christine and her legacy, the idea of how we move forward. So I just want to first acknowledge that Massey College is built on Indigenous land, the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. It is the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we want to continue to owe a duty of stewardship toward this land and also acknowledge the great privilege that we have to do our work here tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Maddy DeWelles. And I want to thank all the guests for being at Massey and for continuing to advocate in such a powerful way.
So hi everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. So far we've had a wonderful, wonderful evening, and I feel very, very grateful to be here today with Igor, Liv, Mazin. So yes, and a welcome to all of you. So welcome to Mazin, Aribi, Igor, Samardzic, and Liv Mendelsohn. And it's really a pleasure to be here to commemorate late Senior Fellow Christine Karza, who was a dear friend, as well as to honor the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Tonight has really been full of so many wonderful moments and memories of Christine, of disability, of filmmaking, of disability in the arts, of friendship, and the love and life of disability. So I'm also very pleased to be moderating tonight's dialogue, and I really look forward to our conversations this evening. So my name is Maddy, and I'm a junior fellow at Massey College, as well as a PhD candidate in the Department of Social Justice Education at OISE, which is the Faculty of Education at U of T. I study disability and childhood studies, and I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Accessibility Committee at Massey, together with my co-chair Samantha Chang. So I'd like to begin with a few introductions of our panelists. So Igor Samardzic is the current chair of the Advisory Committee on Accessible Transit and a co-founder of S&G Urban Partners and Urban Fabric Media, a social enterprise that produces engaging multimedia content on critical urban issues. And his recent experience includes producing a documentary, Accessing the City, which we got a taste of this evening, and overseeing a research project with the University of Toronto on publicly accessible washrooms. He is a featured contributor in Spacing with his latest article titled Planning Cities for People with Disabilities. And Igor, it's such a pleasure to have you here today and to get to connect again and work together. And I'd like to now introduce Mazin Aribi, who is a dedicated accessibility and inclusion expert. Mazin has been advocating and advising on various accessibility-related projects for over 20 years. His passion focuses on accessible transit, where he has served in various roles with the Toronto Transit Commission, the TTC, to improve public transit for persons with disabilities. Specifically, he has developed in-depth knowledge of both conventional and specialized transit systems, and has served as the chair and the vice chair of the TTC's Advisory Committee on Accessible Transit, or ACAT. Mazin also worked as an accessible transit consultant at Stantec to perform audits of accessible subway stations and provide recommended improvement. His current role as a senior accessibility advisor with ProHera ensures the perspectives of persons with lived experiences are at the forefront of all of the company's disability and inclusion training programs. Mazin is a community Mazin is a community advocate, and he is one of the founding members of the Ethno-Racial People with Disabilities Coalition of Ontario, ERDCO, a nonprofit organization that addresses the needs and issues of ethno-racial people with disabilities. At ERDCO, he was involved in making a documentary video about newcomers with disabilities coming to Canada. Mazin, it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you today, and it has been wonderful to meet you and get to work with you over the past few days. And I'd also like to introduce Liv Mendelsohn, who is Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Excellence in Caregiving, powered by the Israeli Foundation. Liv serves as Vice Chair, City of Toronto's Accessibility Advisory Committee, and for many years was the Director of the Wagner Green Centre for Accessibility and Inclusion at the Miles Nadal JCC, and the Artistic Director of the Real Abilities Film Festival. In 2019, she was recognized as a recipient of the City of Toronto Equity Award, and she is a Senior Fellow at Massey College. And Liv, I'm so happy to get to be on a dialogue with you again this year, and it's been such a pleasure to get to know you over the past while. So I guess following our introductions, I'd like to talk a little bit about some more of our panelists' work. So Igor, can you tell us a little bit about your work, what you're currently doing, and as well a little bit about the film project that we got a taste of earlier this evening?
Sure. So thanks, Maddie, for that kind introduction, and for all the other panelists who are with us here tonight, taking the time to be here. So my name is Igor Samardzic. I'm currently an urban planner by trade and actually studied at the University of Toronto, did my research on complete streets and accessibility here. And some of the work that I currently do is in regards to developments and making sure that they're accessible. I also do quite an extensive amount of work in the nonprofit sector. As was mentioned, working with the Advisory Committee on Accessible Transit, currently the chair of that committee, so has to do with the Toronto Transit Commission and trying to ensure that it's as accessible as possible. And then in some of the other work that Maddie alluded to with Urban Fabric Media, it was really a culmination of myself and a couple of my colleagues and peers who were having conversations around accessibility and disability, and the need to do more when it came to that topic. So we sort of got our heads together and tried to think about how we could have the biggest impact as possible. And we wanted to do that in a way that was mindful of people with disabilities and their lived experience, while also being able to communicate their point of view and their experience in terms of the way that they view the world, the way that they travel through space, the way that they get from point A to point B. And so we came up with this idea to create a media sort of social enterprise company where we could leverage multimedia that is everywhere around us in today's world, and being able to do that in a visual and audible way to communicate that message to the public, so that hopefully we can shift the perspectives of decision makers, policymakers, and those folks who are around the table making these systems that perpetuate most times discrimination against people with disabilities.
Igor, thank you so much. That was a beautiful overview of your work, as well as really touching upon and emphasizing the importance of urban planning, the built environment, as well as disability and the lived experience of disability. So thank you so much. And Mazin, I'd like to move on to you now. Would you like to explain or tell us a little bit more about your work, both at at ACAT, but also in your work at URDCO? Tell us a little bit about your work and what you do.
Okay, thank you, Maddie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mazin Aribi. Mazin was born in Iraq, came here in '89. 32 years ago, and I came, my life took a turn when I was 22 from able-bodied to sudden way of accepting a disability that I didn't expect to have, and at the age of 22. And then immigrating to Canada, it was an eye-opening to see and compare the difference between having a disability in Iraq and having a disability here. I was fascinated to see the way of living for people with disabilities at that time, and I made the promise in my deep soul that I want to continue to serve what is good here and try to improve it and build on it, and continue this mantra or to continue this idea about everybody entitled to live with dignity and to be part of this society. So that's how my idea started to be an advocate. And sure enough, eventually, I realized that advocacy at that time in early 90s is a challenge. There was a lot of obstacles. When I start to see the clear picture, it required people with disabilities to fight for their rights, to advocate, to demand, and there was at times, hitting a brick wall, and there is a different acceptance. It wasn't easy, and especially, politicians, government, rules and regulations and all that. I'll give you an example. The TTC just celebrated 100 years being in operations in Toronto, and yet not only until like 25 years ago, that is the first subway station was built, the buses become accessible, and recently, 2014, the first accessible streetcar came to. So I'm purposely mentioning this because I'm going to use it later on the second part. And so when I joined the TTC, I wanted to make sure that it is time to move on to do everything to be inclusive and equitable. It's a public transit, and everybody have the right to use the public transit. And that's how when I joined ACAT, and proudly to say we made a lot of positive changes throughout the years. Simple as no streetcars accessible to everything is accessible. From buses, everything is accessible. We manage to, at ACAT, all members are talented people who have experience. And anyway, we made a lot of positive changes. I don't want to take a lot of time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mazin. Thank you so much. What a beautiful way, to you introducing yourself and your life, and then also going into the geographic experiences of disability, and how your commitment to serve and build on what is good here, but also illustrating what advocacy was like in the early 90s, and the struggles and the challenges there. I also really liked what you said about a different kind of acceptance, and what do we think of, or what do we expect when we think of acceptance? How can we continuously build on that for equity and for equity and accessibility? So thank you so much, Mazin. Liv, I'd like to turn it to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, both at the Center for Caregiving Excellence with Real Abilities and at the JCC, and a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure, thanks, Maddie, and it's always such a pleasure to be with you. I just want to acknowledge Mazin's work for years through ACAT, because I think, and we really saw this during COVID, when you don't have people with disabilities in public space, when people are excluded, we get forgotten about, and policies are developed without us, and the city is shaped without us. So I think people like Mazin, who are on the ground doing the advocacy to make sure that we are included in public space, actually really shift a great deal for the city. So my hat always comes off for Mazin. I've been involved for a long time in working around accessibility and removing barriers, and not just in terms of built environment, but in terms of processes, policies, because it's one thing to be able to access a space, but it's another thing to find out about the space, to be able to register, to attend an event, and still another thing to be asked to speak at an event. And so always, I want to commend Massey for carrying on Christine's legacy in this way. One of the projects that I've been involved in lately is the City of Toronto Vaccine Accessibility Task Force. So as we rolled out vaccinations for COVID across the city, looking at how we could make sure that people with disabilities found out about vaccination processes, and how we could make sure that vaccine sites were accessible, not just in terms of ramps, but in terms of all of the needs that people have. And we're very active now in making sure that the process for children is also inclusive of disability needs, and also offers accommodations and clear pathways for people to request things like a private space to be vaccinated, to be able to bring a companion and a support person. So building all of that in. And the work that we've just started, the Center for Caregiving Excellence really has soft launched, but it launches formally in March. And we're taking a disability informed approach to care. And I think just to draw again on the lessons that we've had in the last couple of years when we saw people separated from the people who provide them with support and care, I think we've really had a shift in the understanding of the importance of caregiving and the interdependence that underlies caregiving for everybody. So it's an exciting new project, and we're looking forward to also doing some of that advocacy and trying to get some shift in policy around caregiving support.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Liv. I think that you touched on so many things about the ways that policies are so often developed without disability in mind, and how the way that you're involved in working within accessibility, but also that process of accessibility. I think that that's so important. How you touched on accessibility, an accessible washroom may exist, but how do you get there? Like how do you arrive in a space? How are you invited into that space? I think this is your work is so important, as well as thinking about COVID-19 and vaccines, especially with children coming now, and that relationship between disability and childhood, I think, is so powerful. And I'm so excited about that soft launch about the disability informed approach to care. That sounds incredible. So I'm really looking forward to how that evolves and to speaking further about it. Thank you so much. So let's talk a little bit about accessing the city, specifically the documentary that we got a taste of earlier tonight. And one thing I wanted to mention was, one of Christine's passions was disability and the arts. I remember in, I think it was summer 2019, she was involved in creating a more accessible performance of the musical Come From Away. And actually, I remember being in Christine's car, and we were on our way to the Children's Book Bank, and Christine had Come From Away playing in the background, and it was great. It was such a special trip and memory. But as we've talked about, part of this evening has been an introduction to Accessing the City, a film in progress by Igor, of which we saw Mazin and Liv both are in. So Igor, can you tell us a little bit more about Accessing the City and how the idea for it came to be?
Yeah, so I think I think the idea sort of started around a premise, which was a story that Mazin actually told me in the past, which is that he had gone with some senior individuals at the TTC and did a ride along where a wheelchair would be provided to a senior administration person who would go along with Mazin through the system to be able to get a perspective of what it's like to view the city from Mazin's point of view, from his sort of lived experience. And it was interesting when he told me the story, Mazin sort of spoke about the emotional toll that this took on those individuals who participated in this activity, and sort of what was learned from them engaging in this type of activity. And there's a wide amount of sort of discussion in the disability accessibility community around this type of simulation that Mazin told me in this story. So what we were trying to sort of do and replicate through this film, Accessing the City, is can we recreate that emotional connection that people can have, but do it in a way that's respectful of everyone's disability and respectful of people's positionalities. So we came up with doing a documentary film so that there's visual cues as well as auditory cues within the film, but we also took a unique approach where we really wanted to hone in on that point of view perspective. And so we've attached sort of GoPro cameras to people with disabilities that we're interviewing, and we worked with them to figure out, what they're comfortable with, what they're willing to show, and create a real collaborative relationship with them that's iterative and co-creating how that would look like and how we would represent that in the film. And what we were able to capture was pretty extraordinary from just the short amount of footage that we showed tonight, but in total, we have hours and hours of footage that we weren't able to incorporate that gives you the perspective from Mazin's point of view and his lived experience and the way that he navigates space. And so you sort of learn the nuance that exists. And to Liv's earlier point around how, disability is something that can look like physical accommodations or something like a ramp, but then as Maddy also pointed out, like being invited to a space and what that looks like and the information that's shared about a space and all these other parameters and attributes that are connected to space that really need to be paid attention to but aren't because they sort of get pushed to the side because they aren't as easy for us to sort of see or as tangible as like a ramp is, for example. So being able to sort of highlight those nuances and where those details lie in the built environment was one of the elements that GoPro camera is able to capture, and Mazin's interaction with people. You're able to sort of see that it's not only about space being accessible. An issue that sort of comes up time and time again is around behaviors and attitudes and the way that people perceive people with disabilities. And that's sort of communicated in some of the GoPro footage that we've been able to sort of capture. So that's sort of like in a nutshell what we've tried to achieve and sort of like where the idea came behind the process of trying to capture these sort of lived experiences with people with disabilities.
Thank you so much, Igor. That's fantastic. And what you were just saying at the end there about how not only do we need to be aware of accessibility in terms of spaces and physical spaces, but also behavior and attitude, and how linked those attitudes are to the environment, to how we interact with each other, to spaces. I remember in watching the trailer, and you pointing it out, Igor, Mazin, with your with the footage, there was a ramp, but like a step going up. And it's like we all kind of have this moment of like, well, how the heck does that even happen, And I think that there's that example of that relationship between people's attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors around ramp accessibility. There you go. But no, there's a step coming up to the ramp. So I think that your film in that even in that trailer, just does such a profound job of illustrating the relationship between disability, lived experience, the built environment, and attitudes and thoughts and behaviors. Thank you so much. Mazin, can you tell us a little bit about more of your involvement in accessing the city or your experiences? How has that experience been like for you and on the project so far?
So, as Igor said, my idea of promoting accessibility and solving the problems is to invite the CEO on the top of the thing, and I did it twice for both CEOs, that they will have an idea, and then that will filter down to the other levels. But after talking to Igor, he proved me slightly need to adjust the approach, which is, how many CEOs going to be willing to spend half a day in a wheelchair? By the way, this wheelchair specifically that they used and I used. So I went with them in a tour for half a day. We tried the subway, the buses, the streetcars, and so on. But to see the bigger picture, to reach out to bigger audience and to bigger advocacy people who's going to make the decisions, it is the right approach to start this project, which is, it's an educational in a way, an eye-opening in a way, and we made sure that there's a lot of unknowns from average people. Especially when I invite people to start with, when I invite people to my place, and they wonder, how do you exit the door? I cannot operate to open the door and hold it and get the chair. No one knows that I have a door opener, and I push a button, the automatic door will open. It's fascinating for some. It's an accommodation for me. So these little things, I think if everybody know about it, then it will be, this is the norm. It is not only for Mazin. Going in an elevator where the buttons are way up, and if you see, I don't know if you noticed, I travel with something called a reacher, where I can reach, because I got stuck in a lot of elevators when I get in and it's too late to realize that the button is way up and stuff. So again, why do we need to put the buttons way up there? And anyway, so, and then going on the street, I literally purposely showed in the project to go to where we just mentioned. There are people who think that they are designing things for us, but at times they fail miserably, but they are incomplete or incorrect and so on. So I'm a believer in nothing about us without us. So this is like a theme always. And the lack of education, I guess, is a key. And we hope that this video will be reaching out to all the governments and the agencies and the businesses out there to understand and to do the right thing by involving the people who are going to be the end users and plan the city right, the streets, sidewalks. There are, again, in the video, I purposely showed quite a few areas where there is like a path of travel, and then there's a big bike share right in the middle. So you actually personally have to divert and go around. Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. And other examples, like tons of footage we have. And so what you just saw, it's a teaser of what's really going on. Yeah, so it is really important to send this message to a bigger audience. And the benefit will be way higher than what we tried to accomplish in the beginning by going individually. And it seemed to be a lot of people thinking, oh, it's not in my backyard, I don't need to learn this. But I purposely mentioned at the age of 22 I become disabled. I didn't expect that. So a disability can happen to anyone at any time. It doesn't care about your age or status, it just happens. So to think the broader picture, and I feel that there are the people who are really successful and advocates is people who get the chance at early stage to know someone who with a disability and get to know them better and about their challenges and all that. And they're willing to accept and understand. So we're hoping that this project will go further, and I'm really keeping my fingers crossed because it is the right thing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mazin. It's beautiful. And I think, what's really standing out for me with what you were saying is, these kind of normal or like normative expectations that, kind of almost go like unexamined. Like when we're going down, like, there's a bike share in the middle of the road. But I think that often that's kind of what happens when we think about the built environment, and kind of like what Liv was saying at the beginning of the documentary or of the trailer. Disability needs to be thought in everything we do, in every interaction and planning, and I think that your film does that so beautifully, and same with seeing the footage from the GoPro. And thank you also, Mazin, for bringing up Nothing About Us Without Us. That lived experience piece was brought out so powerfully and so importantly. So thank you, and I can't wait for the project. Liv, it was so good to have your voice in the background of the trailer, and also to get to see you in the interview as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you said in your statement, particularly about how, it's not necessarily that that disability is a problem or something that needs to be fixed, but rather very often people with disabilities find themselves within disabling environments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mazin gave us a great example. The people designing those elevators weren't designing them to be exclusive. They weren't designing them as inaccessible places. It's a combination of intention and being informed. And I think there's very few people who are planning and designing with the intention of excluding others. But when you're not being intentionally inclusive, which involves the lived experience of people, and not just one person. There's a huge diversity in disability community, lots of different needs. So bringing a whole set of voices to the table to imagine what space will feel like, to think about, well, what needs to be in that elevator so that anybody can access it with ease. And ideally, to design an environment that's universally accessible, but always keeping in mind that there's always going to be individual needs, and there's always going to be needs for individual accommodation as well. So I think a big piece of this, and I know this is something that Igor is thinking about as well, is what kind of exposure to the principles of accessibility and universal design planners, architects, designers have in their education and in their work, and what kind of access do they have to the voices of people with lived experience, because that really makes all the difference.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Liv. I really appreciate what you said too about, you might have universal design, but there's individual accommodation, as well as having that from an education perspective, that exposure to thinking about accessibility, as well as disability, the built environment. So thank you so much, and for all of your work on the documentary, and with all that you do. It's such a pleasure.
Next question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So for our next question, it's almost for all of us, but we'll start off with Igor. So these discussions of disability, accessibility, and the built environment definitely also connect to government and government policies, bureaucratic processes on disability. So how, Igor, do you understand that connection between policy, disability, the built environment, and then, as we've been talking about, lived experiences of disability?
I mean, this is a really fascinating question, and I think there's a lot to unpack with it. So it's great that you asked it for us to have a discussion on. I think that something that I struggle with, I think, is that there's a lot of policies on accessibility and disability. The City of Toronto has accessibility guidelines. A lot of folks talk about accessibility. They know about the AODA. They know about policies, regulations, checklists. I can't even tell you the amount of times I've been in meetings where people are aware of the concept or the idea about accessibility, but for whatever reason, that connection between policy, governance, and a systems level approach to accessibility doesn't sort of end up expressing itself or manifesting itself actually in the built environment or in people's lives who rely on access needs and accommodations. So I think that's number one. I think we need to situate that currently is happening. In regards to that specific connection and sort of like why that is the case, I think part of it comes from two things that I've sort of been able to like narrow down as one is I don't really fully know if accessibility and disability is a priority for organizations and for governments. And I'll be a little bit critical here. I think that folks have great intentions, and I think that everyone wants to do the right thing. But I think at the end of the day, unless you prioritize and make intentional effort to put accessibility first, I'm not really sure that it'll trickle down and get actually implemented. So this is something that we see all the time in sort of organizations and governments. And I think there's sort of this trend, which I like especially using as an example, is that people talk about lens a lot. People talk about a diversity lens, an equity lens, inclusivity lens, and an accessibility lens, which is great. But something that sort of bothers me about using that sort of metaphor around a lens is something that you put on and you take off. So when I think of lenses, I think of my own glasses. I can take off my glasses and put them on, and I do that when it's the most, when it serves me, when it serves my purpose of what I'm trying to achieve, what I'm trying to do. And so I think we need to shift our thinking around accessibility and disability and move, I think, away from this metaphor around a lens, because accessibility isn't something that you get the option of putting on and taking off. It's something that is there and it's always there. And it's something that should start at the beginning of a process. So this relates to like projects and whatnot, and projects getting to 30% or 70% design, and then an accessibility lens being put on at that point. This often happens. And we all the time, and Mazin can probably relate to this, is we always say to folks, bring us into the conversation at the very beginning. Yep. Accessibility is something that you should have at the very beginning. It isn't something that you get to choose when it most serves you, when you bring it on based on a set of checklists or criteria. So I think if we were able to shift that thinking around accessibility and sort of bring the conversation of it earlier into the process, I think we can make some real system change and have that effect, see that effect sort of impacting people's lives, everyday lives. So, yeah.
Fantastic. That was like, yes, like I couldn't agree with you more. Like, yes, that was excellent. So good, Igor. I completely agree. I think that, you're absolutely right. Like what you were saying about in the lens metaphor, 100%. It's like you can put it off, put them on, take them off. But like, no, and getting into like 70% of a project, and then it's like, oh, we should think about accessibility. And that's so, often how things happen. But no, it needs to be right there, right at the forefront, and that shift is so crucial. So that was beautiful. Thank you so much, Igor. Mazin, I was wondering, following Igor, would you like to discuss the relationship or the connection between policy, disability, the built environment, and your lived experiences of disability?
Sure. Thank you, Maddie. So to build up on what Igor has just said, by the way, we talk a lot, and so I am the senior ACAT chair, and Igor just started, second, a few years only. So I always bent and tell Igor, here's what kind of struggles that we used to have. Here's what. So anyway, he's been a good student, I would say. And he's absolutely right. It used to be really draining me when I tried to implement with my group, to implement something right at the get-go, and we are ignored. And then after 30-70%, the policy makers or the TCC or whoever going, and they come and they say, well, it's too late now, it's going to cost us a lot of money. And then we say, well, you didn't tell us, or you didn't come to us at early stages. So it used to be done. Or at one time we used to say, okay, it's time to build an elevator in a station, and then the answer will be, sorry, the budget for this year is not good, and we didn't budget, and so on. And then after a few years, well, if we have budgeted for us, well, why didn't you? We could have built it. So there were so many rejections and games at one time. But eventually, throughout all these, I developed something called ICE theory, I-C-E. I stand for intention, commitment, empathy. So the intention is, in my opinion, if the government or policymakers are have the right intention, they really want to make that change, they really want to accommodate us, then they will do it. You know, I mean, Igor was being nice and saying they have a good intention. At times, yes, maybe. But in the past, it wasn't. I heard it. You know, sleepless nights, upset about things that we want to tell them to do the right thing, and it was a rejection. So anyway, but however, on a positive note, going forward, I think we did crack them in a way to make a culture change. The attitude has been changed, the acceptance, and new policies like after the AODA in 2005. That's, in my opinion, was like a milestone. It's things engraved in stones that, you know, this is the way to go. We have every city in the province of Ontario must have accessible transit system and all that. So that actually helped us, and there was no way of returning back. So anyway, back to my ICE: intention, commitment, empathy. The intention is good, then the results will be good. Commitment, again, as we said, you know, if you're really committed, you're going to do the budget ahead of time. You're going to incorporate it in the plan rather than going back, like right now, going back to retrofit a station, try to insert an elevator, knocking walls and expanding things. This will cost actually way more rather than do it right. And one of the positive things is going forward at ACAT, every new station, every new line, like Glinton Crosstown or the Finch LRT Crosstown coming, these will be accessible from the get-go with elevators, with automatic doors. So doing the right things is in place, so there is no one, I think, will come and say, oh, we don't have money or we're not going to do it. No. So this change is so important and crucial. And my hope is to see, and the last one is empathy. Don't design it until you ask us or and understand what kind of RAM I need, what kind of buttons I need, the height, the shape. And it's not only physical. My colleague Liv mentioned earlier, it's for everybody, it's exclusive. An elevator, you know, parents with baby strollers can benefit that. A visually impaired person need to feel the button. And so having Braille, bigger size buttons and all that. Cameras, handrails, you know, my grandma can hold on to, and things like that. So again, I lost my train of thought. But in general, people with disabilities are here to stay. They are part of this society, and there is no way we're returning back. We have entered a one-way street called achieving fully accessibility and inclusive, and yeah, I'm really hoping. And my last wish is to have the younger generations, is to take the torch from us, the senior, I speak for myself, he's still here, to continue this journey of advocating and doing the right things for the benefit of all, not for Mazin, Igor, Liv, and everybody. No, everybody. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mazin, for that beautiful and such thoughtful response. I absolutely loved, what you were saying about, disability is here to stay. Absolutely, and disability is life. Disability is love. It's care. It's desire. It's so strong, and I think that everything that you said just encapsulated that so beautifully with intention, commitment, and empathy. And you're absolutely right. Like sometimes you might think, oh well, there's a good intention, but sometimes not really. And having to work through that through commitment, through work, but to ultimately get to that place of absolutely, people with disabilities are here to stay, and the environment, our attitudes, our interactions need to change. For the love and the life, the care, of people with disabilities. So I thank you so much, Mazin. Igor, I just wanted to quickly do a quick check. How are you for?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Why don't we finish with that?
We'll finish with,
Yeah.
and then we'll. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry. No worries. Liv, I wanted to just get your thoughts on what we've been talking about a little bit here, in terms of. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see that connection between disability, lived experience, and some of the policies of governments, as well as these processes of bureaucracy, both in your work, your life, and with everything that you've experienced?
I mean, I think these two gentlemen have said it very well, but I think there's a challenge endemic to policy development, especially, in terms of policy advisors and government staff, that it's seen as they have expertise in policy development. They are the experts, and there's a consultation process or a community engaged process, but it's really kind of external to the actual policy development. And really, people with lived experience should be seen as experts and partners and contributors to the process. Mm-hmm. And that's a real shift that I think has to take place, rather than, as Igor was saying, that checklist of, okay, did you consult community? Mm-hmm. Consulting community is not the same thing as developing policies that are responsive to community needs. So I think that's a big shift, and I think we're starting to see a little bit more of that, but there is indeed a long way to go there. And we want to be at the tables where the sausage gets made, so that it's a terrible metaphor, but a better tasting sausage, there's a sausage that everyone can enjoy, even vegetarians, I don't know, but that's really the idea. And the other piece I think that both of you brought up is around the resource allocation. We have to be realistic from the start about budgeting and what the hard costs are, and not come partway through and discover that we don't have the resources. That if we're going to do something with intention, that actually has to be on the balance sheet as well, and it has to be clear from the start that we're budgeting for the process of being able to bring in people to help with their expertise, and for to be able to enact the recommendations that you get out of that process. It's not particularly helpful to have a stellar set of recommendations that then you don't have the time or budget to put into practice.
Thank you so much, Liv. Absolutely. And I really like what you said about, first, that sausage sounds great. I'm all for it. The budgeting for process, absolutely. And I love that kind of full circle back to process. It might be great to have a set of recommendations, but what are we going to do with that? How is that going to appear? I also love, what you were saying about partners and contributors within the process isn't the same as consulting community. That was, I think, a really important distinction. So thank you so much.
Maddie, can I just make one more point?
100%, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to something that Liv said.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no.
Getting into it now.
No, this conversation is really great, and I enjoy sharing this space with all you folks and having it. One thing that it reminded me in terms of resource allocation, resource management, was the curb cut. And it's a really fascinating story around the curb cut and sort of how that came to be. So if folks imagine an intersection that we all cross the street or whatnot, and the sidewalk slopes down, that's a curb cut. So you can, nicely sort of walk into the street, and then you can come out on the other side up a curb cut to where you're going. And so curb cuts weren't the standard or something that was as of right that existed, decades and decades ago. Streets were not made, or sidewalks were not made with them. And it was thanks to advocacy and folks really sort of challenging the status quo and disrupting these sort of systems where that became something that now we wouldn't even think otherwise. We'd be of course, when you're building a street and you're building a sidewalk, you would just put in a curb cut. And I think that we're getting to that point with bike lanes, for example, where we've seen quite a bit of work done and advocacy done with regards to bike lanes, and reaching the point where when we're building streets now, we automatically build sort of these things that are referred to as complete streets, and we put in bike lanes. And they're just something that's part of the project budget, and they're just included. And so I think that we really need to shift thinking and get to a point where accessibility isn't an add-on. It's something that's part of the process. it's integrated fully within the process, and it's something that's budgeted for. It shouldn't be something that we look at and we're like, oh, you know, it costs X amount of money to put in an elevator or to put in a ramp. It should just be default that we put in a ramp or an elevator. So I just wanted to add that point because I just thought of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's a fantastic point about accessibility needing to be integrated fully into process. That's excellent. Thank you so much, Igor. And I also just wanted to say, kind of as we near the end of our time together, just how thankful I am of all of your incredible insights and thoughtful, beautiful responses. Christine is here with us, and she's smiling, and I think that she'd be just so proud. I know that, and I'm really honored to have been able to talk with all of you today about the life, the work of Christine, as well as disability, accessibility, the built environment, and working together for continuing to work together for change. So I just want to thank you all. It has been such a special evening, and thank you to our wonderful audience as well.
I'm not sure whether have you ever encountered when you go to the elevator and the sign say out of order. So what do? Did they put a sign to say something, who you can contact, or what the other options? So that's what I wanted to ask, whether you have that before.
Can I
Thank
answer
you.
that?
Absolutely.
So this is great questions, and so many times I have lots of surprises. That's why we at the TTC, where I was advocating, one of the people, we have an alternative signage. It tells you exactly if this elevator in front of you not working, what to do, and there is an alternative in every elevator that you can think of. So it give you a description. Now, however, reading and understanding, that's a different story. Yes.
Yeah.
But bang on, it's a good point. That's why having two elevators. I live in a building when they did an overhaul in one, and hoping to, after they finish the first one, they will do the second one. Guess what? The second one, before the overhaul, broken, and there was few days that we, people with disabilities in different levels, have to stay home, prisoners. Because think about it, it's a prison because I cannot go out. And period, I'm stuck in my place. So, yeah, so that's one of the examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the conversation tonight. I had a question and around whether or not you reach into the international sphere, and in particular the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, for your advocacy and for to be able to push for financing and funding, etc., so that Canada is complying with those rights we signed up to under the international conventions. Thanks.
The UN rapporteur has been, over the past few years, doing a series of reports and investigations on the situation in Canada, actually. So we're very much under the spotlight. And I think, there are differences between what's in the UN Declaration and what's in Canada's Human Rights Code and the new federal accessibility legislation and, all these jurisdictional questions. I think absolutely, we turn to those principles and cite them and remind people of them. But like you're within, our for instance, our building code is the law of the land, and is really a far cry from accessible. So I think there's absolutely partnerships and coalitions internationally, but often accessibility plays out very locally as well, and we need kind of stronger support locally to make sure that the environments that we're in every day are accessible.
My question is about the role of technology in managing the way in which we reimagine space, reimagine all of our transient disabilities or permanent disabilities. And I'm interested in the fact that we now have a special center here for, technology, law and technology, and so on. And I wonder how much the voice of disability is into the development of technology. Because I worry about two things. Number one, that technology will be developed, but it just won't be accessible, and it would be so much simpler. On the other hand, there's an incredible power to actually facilitate many access, and it could be actually transformative. With self-driving cars could make it a much more feasible, easy solution for some people. So, is that a big part of the thinking, and how does it play out in the policy development?
You want to go
get
first?
that? Sure.
You go first.
There are so many ways to answer this question. Actually, I'm gonna try. So it needs to be a balance. Technology is a blessing if you are able to use it, but there is a lot of resistance from the generations before me. I don't have a computer. I don't know how to operate a smartphone, and I see it with my parents. I try to tell them and educate them and all that. However, if you know how to use it, I use, for example, a tool that I sign up for elevator alert. So before I go to the TTC, I receive via email, elevator at such and such station is out of service. So this is like 24 hours. So before I go out, I will look, okay, this station, I'm not going to that one, so I'm good. Or, oops, that one is down, oh shoot, I have to find an alternative. But even before I go. For example, Google Map, when you click on directions, they had recently added an option if your route wanted to be accessible. I didn't know that until a few years. So, but it's made a big change. When they designed the route, they will exclude whatever, a few years ago when the streetcar wasn't accessible, they will exclude the streetcars. Smart. And or subway stations that's already not accessible yet, they will exclude that. So it's beautiful. So technology can be very, and for the visually impaired, there's a huge apps and things to do and tools that actually assist people in their daily life, if they can be able to use it.
I would say, I have low vision. Voice to text has changed my world. I use voice to text all day, every day. Yep. That's why if you get emails from me, there's frequently little typos here and there, but most of the people in my world understand that at this point. I think there's huge potential in technology, but there's also the risk of, like everything with disability, that it becomes a specialized, hived off piece and it doesn't enter the mainstream. Exactly. I think there's a lot of people who are doing specialized work in accessibility, particularly in website accessibility. Google has done a lot of work around accessibility. There's a lot of potential and a lot of excitement. Locally, MyUnziv and Access Now have done great work with mapping accessibility and what places are accessible, so you can find out, does this place have an accessible washroom and can I get to it? But most websites are still not accessible to screen readers. So if you are using a screen reader, you can't find out the information that you need. And platforms like Zoom have been profoundly liberating for some people who, for whom it's a lot harder to get from place to place. But not all of those platforms are accessible to people who, again, use screen readers or have other access barriers. So there's a lot of potential there, but there's also, once again, the potential for a lot of being left behind and left out. So yeah, it needs to be front and center.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the questions, and thank you so much to Mazin and Liv for your wonderful and thoughtful responses. Just really quickly, I just wanted to just add a couple of the questions. Robin, with transient disability, I think that was so interesting, and something that popped into my head when you were talking about communication and communicating. I had a friend talk to me, and she has dyslexia, and was saying how, you know, in registering for accessibility services, you have to read like a 30-page document. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, like what? And you know, I mean, like these are like we're living with disability. With you know, the lived experience often comes with these tensions and these huge something that that my supervisor and the supervisor of some of my friends here today says like cultural contradictions. It's like these like all the time, and the other thing too, like with Zoom and technology, I absolutely agree that there's a lot of potential for sure. But then, you know, like Liv, what you were saying with how there is a little bit of a worry of accessible features kind of becoming like kind of hidden, or something that you have to kind of look for that aren't really prominent. I mean, like, well, there's another tension there, but also in the sense of, you know, how are we as users of Zoom kind of making the space more accessible? Like, you know, a couple of things come to mind that are often said in some of my classes or meetings, you know, saying your name before you speak, or, you know, a lot of people love the chat box, but sometimes nobody says what's going on in the chat box, and that can also be tricky. So I think that, you know, absolutely I agree with everything that you've said in terms of how there is potential, but, you know, it's also a little bit of a reorientation to how we're both experiencing and also interacting with these technology platforms. I think that can really increase accessibility and make us think about disability differently. With that, I just wanted to say thank you again to our audience and for your questions. Thank you so much to Liv and Mazin. And I know Igor had to pop out, but it's been such a pleasure. It's been a real, such a special evening. And thank you all, and thank you to Christine.